orangutans that fish with sticks, gorillas that measure the depth of the river they want to cross with sticks, macaques that break mussels with carefully selected rocks, chimpanzees that hunt termites with thin branches, and monkeys that ride horses armed with weapons. No, the last one is a joke, but all the ones I mentioned before are just a few of the countless examples of non-human primates using tools. But primatologists are now considering a much more extraordinary possibility that monkeys may have entered the Stone Age. At least some monkeys, such as chimpanzees and capuchins, just like humans did about 3 million years ago. It seems that these monkeys may have entered the Stone Age not just yesterday, but centuries or even millennia ago. What does this mean? Is Planet of the Apes real? Let's find out. Until Jane Goodall started observing chimpanzees closely in the 1960s, we thought that tool-making was a behavior unique to humans. In fact, that's why, at the beginning of the 20th century, anthropologists defined humans as animals that make tools. But it turns out that this ability is not unique to us, like many other characteristics that we thought were unique to humans. If you recall, we have talked about the details of this before. If you are interested in these topics, I would definitely recommend watching our animal intelligence video. Now, we are so used to it that we don't think about it enough, but being able to use tools is such a fascinating ability. Just think about it. For an animal, to be able to use a tool means that it is intelligent enough to realize that it can remove the obstacle between itself and the thing it wants to reach by using a stone or a stick that seems completely unrelated to the thing it wants to reach. In other words, before that animal even uses that tool, it is just thinking in its mind how to use it, how to manipulate it, how to take it to its goal. It is not easy. In fact, it is even questionable whether many people walking among us can do this. But look, using tools is one thing, and making tools is something completely different. Because it is not enough to try to overcome the obstacles in the wild by using only the structures and shapes found in nature. Creating something that you know you need, or at least can imagine, but does not yet exist in nature, is a completely different dimension. Making tools is like a cognitive revolution. This civilization that makes humans human is exactly what became possible. Whatever modern technology you are using right now, from cars to airplanes, from rockets to televisions, from the internet, everything from mobile phones to everything, I can shape that first stone according to our needs by hitting another stone. It started with the Stone Age, which we all know from the Flintstones cartoon. The Stone Age consists of 3 large and important groups. The first is the lower Paleolithic period, when human culture based on tools began. This period, which started 2.5 to 3.5 million years ago, when the first members of the Homo genus emerged, continued roughly until the emergence and rise of Homo sapiens, that is, until 200 to 300,000 years ago. That is, during this period that lasted about 3 million years. We were completely hunter-gatherers. We had not yet discovered agriculture. Our existence depended on wild animals, birds, fish that we could defeat thanks to our tools, and wild fruits, snacks and nuts that we collected on site with our own hands. It was during this period that we first learned to make tools by hitting one stone against another. When we hit 2 stones at the right angle and speed, we saw that small and sharp pieces called lithic flakes, or flakes in short, broke off from the stone, which we call lithic core, which is softer than the stones. Later, we cut these flakes with a knife. We realized that we could use them as axe tips and spear tips. First, we developed the tool culture we call today, using smaller flakes, and then the Acheulean culture evolved, based on larger flakes. In other words, our ancestors living at that time were not very different from the orangutans or chimpanzees that I showed at the beginning in terms of culture and civilization. As I told you before, Homo sapiens broke away from their ancestor called Homo heidelbergensis about 300,000 years ago and separated from their closest cousins, the Neanderthals, and started a period we call the Middle Paleolithic. This period continued until 28,000 years ago from today, at which point our tools were more complex, but interestingly, the tools that dominated the period originally belonged to us, rather than Homo sapiens, namely our Neanderthal cousins. At that time, the Neanderthals, who dominated the world at least as much as we do, had reached a cognitive capacity and culture complex enough to give special care to their elderly and perform rituals after they're dead. Here are the mustering tools that emerged as a part of this culture. Neander had features that matched the grip strength of hands that were stronger than ours, and the tips that we could produce. During this period, sapiens also started to spread out of Africa for the first time and spread around the world. For example, we first reached the Australian continent during this period, and we also learned to truly control fire. We first started to decorate our bodies with jewelry and paints and draw murals during this period. And most importantly, we first learned solidarity in the true sense at this point. Up until that point, our species and its ancestors had a certain social life, of course, but under more difficult and more complex conditions. For example, during this period, we moved from hunting in individual and small groups to hunting in more coordinated and larger groups, which taught us to work together, establish more complex social relationships, and adapt to the demands and needs of others. In other words, our modern culture first began to truly rise at this point. Then came Jesus in the Upper Paleolithic. During this period, which lasted until about 12,000 years ago, roughly the time when Göbekli Tepe was built and agriculture was discovered, Jesus became more and more specialized in making tools. Our tools became increasingly diverse, and it started to become more complicated. We became more adept at accessing food. For example, we started to produce darts, which are now called arrows, which are thrown by blowing with breath, underwater spears, fishing rods, oil lamps, and ropes. In our wall paintings, we started to use dots and lines to represent the months based on the cycles of the moon. For the first time, we started to use shapes similar to the letter Y to describe animal birth in the same drawings we spread unstoppably throughout Asia and Eurasia. And that's exactly what our closest cousins who lived in this period, Nean troubles, became extinct. These conflicts between species and tribes and wide geographical spread also developed the understanding of ethnic culture and caused the emergence of local cultural understandings instead of a single species having a common culture. Accordingly, local differences started to appear in our tools after the Bronze Age, which would last for about 1,300 years after the stones came. The Iron Age, and as you all know, our civilization has reached. Today, we don't just use iron, we use steel, which is an iron strengthened with carbon. We produce brand new materials. We can even create new elements, not to mention materials. But I want to draw your attention to this. The Homo genus and the 14 human species we have discovered so far have lived almost their entire lives in the Stone Age. Think about it. The Homo genus has been around for 2 to 3 million years. The Stone Age lasted longer than 2.5 million years. So you can imagine that it is exciting to go into space or cross continents by floating metal chunks in water. Let me give you an example. Capuchin monkeys living in Brazil can normally break hard-shelled fruits with stones or bring spiders hidden under the ground to the surface with stones. As I said at the beginning, we already knew these, but experts who examine these animals more closely do not yet know why capuchins sometimes break stones by hitting them against each other, and why they lick the pieces of the broken stones and display them. They probably eat the minerals accumulated in the broken stones. But when researchers looked at the lithic flakes scattered around from the stones they broke to lick this dust, they saw something very strange. These were almost exactly the same as the flakes produced by humans, and it seems that these capuchins did not start producing these tools until a few hundred years ago. They have been producing these flakes for thousands of years, and they have not yet been observed to turn them into weapons, but they may be doing it, and we may have completely missed it. So this kind of revolutionary discovery may be waiting for the next Jane Goode forehead. Yes, I am calling you. Capuchins aside, we already know that some primates can use tools in ways that are different from their most obvious uses. For example, bonobos, which we think are closer to us than chimpanzees, do not only use thick sea sticks to dig termite nests, but also use them as a lever to move rocks and nests that would otherwise be difficult to lift. In addition, bonobos can reach bone marrow by hitting sharp stones into bones, or they can make spears from tree branches and use them as weapons or barriers. According to primatologists, the methods used by bonobos are similar to those of Homo sapiens, who produced cultural products from the lower Paleolithic. Not only that, bonobos living together with humans can even exhibit behaviors such as barbecuing, and we also know that chimpanzees prefer cooked meat to raw meat. In fact, even humans. Even more extreme behaviors such as washing clothes and sheets have been observed in orangutans that watch. These are just a few examples of advanced tool use. All of these observations have led to the emergence of a field called primate archaeology in the last 12 to 13 years, and the subsequent claim that these species are now in the Stone Age. However, there are a few important points to remember when making this claim. First, when we say that other species that used and even made stone tools were also in the Stone Age, because humans have come from the Stone Age and survived to the present day, we are making a claim as if there was only one possible biological or cultural evolution that could produce a complex creature capable of establishing civilizations like humans. In other words, we are implying that other apes were also on their way to becoming humans, and in fact, they had to be. This is a question that is often asked by those who do not fully understand evolution. In fact, since humans are descended from apes, why don't other apes become humans? However, there is no goal or purpose in evolution to become humans. The surname that came to humans is Haspel. Destiny emerged from the beginning of destiny. It emerged as a completely different species with the same gene pool and the same chain of change. It is impossible to pass because of the chaotic structure of the environment and genetics. Of course, I explained evolution. Similar characteristics will evolve under similar conditions. But there is no rule that an animal that uses stone tools will later go to the Bronze Age like humans, and then to the Iron Age. Maybe they will build a completely different culture and establish a civilization on a completely different backbone. Therefore, we need to completely remove from our minds the idea that the purpose of evolution is to create humans. Since all species currently living are still alive, they are at least as successful as us in evolutionary terms. Well, we are currently destroying them because of our culture. That is a separate issue. But if you think about it in terms of biology, which is the main field of evolution, they are not inferior species anyway. Why did they become humans? In the past weeks, we talked about the beginning of life with dear Furkan Öztürk from Harvard University. If you haven't watched it, I recommend you watch our live broadcast from beginning to end. One of the questions we discussed there was why new creatures cannot emerge from the chemical soup today, and we know the answer to that very well. because existing life, especially microbial life, has occupied every place where life can start from scratch and start again. That's why some chemical molecules are on the fresh surface. They can't go beyond being food for existing life that has become biochemically complex in the waters under the ocean or around hydrothermal vents. Therefore, life can't start from scratch again. Since humans currently dominate all habitats, the probability of new cultures and hominid species evolving is almost zero. Therefore, even if apes were in the Stone Age, that doesn't mean they would be able to build human-like cultures. Third, academic studies have provided conflicting results regarding apes' stone tool-making skills. For example, in one study, researchers found that chimpanzees were given all the materials they needed to make stone tools, but they were reluctant to put them together to produce meaningful tools. The researchers even created incentives by starving them for a while and placing their favorite foods behind obstacles that only stone tools could overcome. Despite this, chimpanzees could not get the food they wanted by making a simple tool, but when they included a human who showed them how to make it, chimpanzees were able to learn to make tools by watching humans and even others. I was able to teach chimpanzees. So if there is a spark that will ignite the fire of civilization in non-human apes, it may be humans themselves. As you can see, it is very nice to think that non-human apes also entered the Stone Age and had dreams similar to those in the Planet of the Apes, but it is not clear exactly what such an assumption does. Of course, if apes are on their way to building a superior culture, it is important to recognize this early. As a result, in our archaeological research on the human past, when we examine areas where we lived together with animals such as the capuchin or chimpanzees, we need to consider that some of the tools we discover may have been made by non-human apes. Will we provide these other cultures with a habitat like nature gave us in the past, or not? The answer to this question depends on what this blue planet will be like in the future. See you in the next video that will determine how it will look. Bye-bye.